So before we get started, I just want to check that everyone can see my screen okay with the PowerPoint presentation shared. I've got a thumbs
Yes, we
up.
can.
Yes, we
Okay,
can.
great. Thank y'all so much for confirming. Alrighty, so I think we can go ahead and get started, and I will first kick it over to Keith Stokes to provide us with an introduction for this evening before we get into introducing the Griffin and Strong team and finally get on with our presentation for you all this evening. Keith?
Thanks, Hannah, and thank everyone for taking the time, your busy schedules, to join us tonight. Tonight is the first in a one-year effort to begin the process of meeting Rhode Island general law requirements that every 5 years we provide a disparity study. The intent of this disparity study, which is being launched by the state of Rhode Island, is going to provide really important information to help establish a factual based assessment to ensure that all firms have equal opportunities to participate in public procurement. This will be a very comprehensive and a very dedicated process, but the most important aspect of it is to ensure that Rhode Island businesses have equal access and, most importantly, contribution as we begin collecting the data and assessing the performance of the state. We're very pleased that as a part of a open procurement process, we engage one of the top firms in the country, Griffin and Strong, and they are now our vendor and our partner. And tonight they're going to walk you through the process of a disparity study analysis, the types of data that will be extracted, and most importantly, setting the stage today and going forward that you as business people in Rhode Island have every opportunity to engage both the vendors and ourselves at the state to ensure that this final report is reflective to the business needs and, most importantly, the business success in Rhode Island. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Hannah for the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Keith. I appreciate it. So as I said, my name is Hannah Rowell. I'm a project manager with Griffin and Strong, and I'm serving as the primary point of contact for the State of Rhode Island Disparity Study. I'll also let the two other team members from Griffin and Strong introduce themselves briefly as well before we get on with our presentation. Hema, if you would like to introduce yourself first.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I am Hema Das Narayan Singh, Senior Manager, Consultant Group at the Griffin and Strong.
And good evening, everyone. David Maher. I am a partner in the legal division here at Griffin and Strong.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And just a note before we get started, I am getting over a cold, so I will try and keep the sniffles to a minimum. But just in case I do have to pause for any reason for just a second to get my voice back, I just wanted to let you know that in advance, so bear with me here. So we will go ahead and get started with today's presentation for you. So just a brief overlook at our agenda for today's presentation. We'll start with an introduction to Griffin and Strong, who we are as a firm, and kind of the work that we do with the state throughout this process. We'll look at an objective of the disparity study that we conduct, go through the technical approach that Griffin and Strong utilizes in order to complete our disparity study, and the methodology that goes along with that approach as well. We'll talk about the findings and recommendations. The findings are what we identify from each of the key components of our technical approach of the disparity study, and our recommendations are made accordingly to those findings that are identified from those key components. We'll talk about how you can get involved as well. This is a big portion of our disparity study analysis, which is anecdotal evidence collection. We have a lot of different anecdotal events that we host that the community can get involved in, which is why we like to do this informational meeting at the start of the disparity study process so that we can really introduce and get integrated into the community, because we are going to be wanting to hear from business owners throughout the entire process. We'll look at an overview of the disparity study timeline, and then of course at the end we will have time for a Q&A. If you do have, it's a lot of material that we're going to be covering throughout this presentation, a lot of different slides that can tend to get methodology technical heavy. So I do encourage you, if you have any questions throughout the process and you just want to pop them in the chat, we can come back to those during the Q&A portion as well, so that you don't lose your train of thought. And we will just have some time at the end to answer any of those questions. And then we will have about 30 minutes at the end of today's meeting as well for an optional public comments section. Again, this is optional. It's just an opportunity for business owners to stay back with me. I'll dismiss anyone else. The meeting will have concluded at that point as far as Griffin and Strong providing any information to you all. But if you would like to stay back and provide any comments about your experiences doing business or attempting to do business, or even if you have not done business with the state, your reasonings for why not. If you do want an opportunity to go ahead and speak with the Griffin and Strong team about your experiences and your testimony as a business owner, I will dismiss everyone and stay back with those who would like to provide those comments. And I will let Hema introduce a little bit of information about Griffin and Strong.
Thank you, Hannah. So our firm, Griffin and Strong, is a public policy consultant firm, and as Keith said, is one of the top firms in the country. We specialize in procurement research. We do training and supplier diversity consulting. We consult on contract compliance, and we do program development. We believe we have the most qualified team in the industry. We have 7 Juris Doctors, a PhD in economics, a PhD in social psychology, a PhD in anthropology, a PhD in history, and a PhD in strategic management. And this team of experts will be working on this particular project. And you are indeed in very good hands. Our project executive, Rodney K. Strong, who is also the Chief Executive Officer of Griffin and Strong, has unmatched expertise. He served as Director of Contract Compliance at the City of Atlanta. He was project manager on the first post-Croson disparity study, and you will hear more about this in the legal analysis by David. And he served as principal architect of the City of Atlanta's distinguished Equal Business Opportunity Contracting Program. He also qualified as an expert witness in 2 cases. Our senior economist, Dr. Gregory Price, has 25 years of experience in economic analysis of the discrepancies of employment, private sector contracting, lending, and public contracting, and was recently named one of the top 40 Black economists of the last 30 years.
Thank you, Hema. These next 2 slides are going to provide an overview of the objective of the disparity study as well as the technical approach that Griffin and Strong takes to complete our disparity study. So firstly, a disparity study is an objective research tool that is used to determine if disparities exist in an agency's procurement based on race and or gender in various industry categories. We'll talk a little bit more about these industry categories when we get into the data analysis portion of today's meeting. But those industry categories kind of define how we categorize all of the work that we do throughout this process. A disparity study further determines whether those disparities that may or may not be identified are statistically significant, and further if they're likely caused by the race and gender status of firm owners, or if there are other race and gender neutral elements that could be driving those disparities as well. As we talked about, there's a lot of different facets to a disparity study process aside from just the data analysis. So disparity studies also utilize anecdotal evidence, which we've discussed. We review the agency's policies, practices, and procedures. And then we just utilize Griffin and Strong's best practices that we've developed in this field to make our recommendations. And importantly, those recommendations must be narrowly tailored to fit the findings of the study. As I mentioned, our findings come from those key components of our disparity study process, and our recommendations really just tie back directly to the findings that we have identified through that process. And the importance of narrow tailoring will be talked about in a little bit more depth by David when he's going through the legal component of the disparity study as well. So this is just a kind of 10-step overview of the technical approach of Griffin and Strong's disparity study process. I'm not going to go into too much depth on this slide necessarily because we have slides dedicated in this presentation to each one of these components. But just so that at a glance you can kind of see what this process looks like overall that we will be undertaking with you guys over the next year. So we start with our kind of foundational legal analysis process. We then get into our policy review, again, policies, practices, procedures of the state of Rhode Island. We collect and clean data that we collect from the state of Rhode Island throughout a rigorous process of working really diligently with the state in order to collect and identify any databases that we need for the purposes of the disparity study. Once we've done that, we can conduct our relevant geographic market area analysis, our utilization analysis, then get into our availability analysis, and finally comparing both the utilization and availability analysis is where we can look at our disparity analysis between those two. Again, we will get into all of these elements in more detail throughout this presentation. We also have our passive participation analysis, also known as our marketplace analysis, and of course our anecdotal evidence analysis as well. And all of these different components culminate into our final report, which again has those narrowly tailored recommendations that are based off of the findings that we've collected throughout the full disparity study process. And I will hand it over to David, the legal and policy analyst for this study, to talk about the legal approach and policy review.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. Again, excuse me, one of the basic questions that we get when we start the disparity study process is why do we do them? What is a disparity study? And really, as Hannah explained earlier, that it's a research tool, and a disparity study is intended to form the factual basis that would be necessary for any remedial contracting program that the state may continue or institute or implement. So you see here a couple of case citations, the City of Richmond versus J.A. Croson from 1989. That's when the U.S. Supreme Court first ruled that a contracting program that had race or gender conscious elements to it needed to be supported and passed the strict scrutiny requirement. That's a constitutional requirement under the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. And so strict scrutiny became the law for any state or local procurement programs. The Adirondack Constructors case is a 1995 case which addressed the federal program, in that case, the federal DOT program, and found that, again, the strict scrutiny analysis would also apply to the federal government's program under the Fifth Amendment equal protection provision. So what is strict scrutiny? Well, strict scrutiny really has two aspects to it. The first is that there needs to be a factual basis in evidence to justify a remedial contracting program. And the methodology that we use to establish that factual basis or that factual predicate is determined also by the case law, the federal case law, since Croson, since 1989. So there needs to be a factual basis in evidence to support the need for a remedial contracting program. And then it must be narrowly tailored to remedy only the underutilizations that are identified in the study itself. So you can't have over or under inclusion. You can't have study groups that are not found to be underutilized as part of a goals-based program. And also you cannot have goals attached to contracts for which industry categories were not subject to underutilization. So the remedy has to fit what you found in the statistical analysis, which formed the factual basis for your program in the first instance. So again, strict scrutiny requires a factual basis in evidence and narrow tailoring to make sure that you're remedying only what you found to be statistically significant in the statistical analysis. And the legal analysis is one of the deliverables that we do for the state. So there will be a much more meaty discussion, if you will, of disparity studies and where they came from, but more importantly, the methodology that Griffin and Strong is using in this study and the federal case decisions that support that methodology. And as Hannah indicated, one of the other early aspects of the study is the policy review. And so this is an analysis of the written policies that govern procurement with the state of Rhode Island. So it's policies, procedures, and in any internal standard operating procedures as well. And so what we do is an analysis of the written policies, but we also do interviews with staff and the staff members who do implementation on a day-to-day basis. And the key questions that we're trying to solve through those policy reviews and interviews is, do the policies as written potentially present a barrier to participation by MBE firms or WBE firms? Are the written policies properly understood by staff, or is there some discrepancy in the policy as written and how it's being implemented on a day-to-day basis? And then finally, are there some policies that could be modified to promote greater inclusion for MBE and WBE firms? And this ultimately results in a policy chapter where we lay out what we have learned from our review of the written policies and the interviews. And ultimately, those are going to inform the findings and recommendations from a policy perspective that we'll talk about on a later slide.
Thanks so much, David, for covering the legal and policy chapter. Alrighty, so next, getting started with our relevant geographic market area analysis. This is kind of the start of our data portion of our disparity study analysis, which is really a large, probably the largest chunk of the disparity study process between, as we spoke about, collecting and cleaning data from the state of Rhode Island, making sure that we have all of the data that we need to conduct our analysis. And then finally, getting started with our relevant geographic market area. So, how Griffin and Strong defines the relevant geographic market area is measuring by where the state is spending at least 75% of its dollars. So, really, the resource that we look at in order to define where the state is spending at least 75% of its dollars is the state's payment data that we collect through the data collection process. So looking at that data collection, we're really just seeing where is the state spending its money. And we'll kind of look until we see and get a picture of where at least 75% of that spend is being made. And we'll kind of draw a line around that. And from that portion on, our disparity study will focus on that relevant geographic market area from that portion on. Our analysis is disaggregated by 5 industry categories, as I mentioned earlier. So we have construction, we have architecture and engineering services, so like construction management, surveyors, mapping, things like that. We have our professional services category, legal, medical services, financial services, anything that kind of falls into that category. General services, which are any services that really don't fall into the architecture and engineering or professional categories. And then we have our goods, which are all of our tangible items. As I mentioned, only firms in the relevant geographic market area are what is going to be included in the disparity study after that point. Then we have our utilization analysis, and our availability analysis. And these are on the same slide because, again, they are conducted after we have been able to determine our relevant geographic market. And then utilization and availability go hand in hand with one another and are ultimately compared in order to get our disparity analysis, which we'll talk about on the next slide. So the utilization analysis has the data measured for both prime and subcontractors at that point. We really disaggregate the data down to a really fine point by year. So we have 5 years as a part of our study period, 5 fiscal years as a part of our study period for this study. We disaggregate it by the 5 industry categories that we just spoke about as well. And we also further disaggregate it by the race, gender, and ethnic status of businesses. Additionally, Griffin and Strong will also be conducting a no goals analysis so that we can view the utilization of subcontractors on awards where no goals are present on those contracts so that we can see the behavior of prime contractors in the instances where there are no goals on that contract. Our availability analysis, Griffin and Strong uses what is called a list-based approach, which looks at bidders, vendors, awardees, payees, certified MWBEs, as well as any third-party lists, such as the Rhode Island Department of Transportation or other local vendor lists, in order to come up with an availability list of firms that are ready, willing, and able to do business with the state of Rhode Island. In addition to this availability analysis, Griffin and Strong will provide an estimate of availability of veteran-owned business enterprises as well. And I'm just going to grab some water really quickly. Alrighty, so like I said, availability and utilization are then compared to each other in order to create the disparity index for each race, gender, and ethnicity group. Of course, again, disaggregated by industry categories and disaggregated by the fiscal years. Further than just looking at those disparity indices, we also do a statistical significance test where we apply a standard deviation analysis to see if those disparity indices are statistically significant or not. We also conduct a regression analysis to determine if disparities can be explained by any other factors other than race, ethnicity, or gender status. So there could be other factors such as education status of a firm owner, the age of the firm, any of these kind of other race and gender neutral factors that could be driving any disparities that you see present in the disparity indices portion. I do just want to mention kind of it was helpful how David mentioned the legal analysis and how that culminates in the legal chapter, the policy review, which culminates in the policy chapter. All of these elements that we just covered of the data analysis go into a quantitative analysis chapter. So that's what all of these different processes culminate into. So we have a really detailed quantitative analysis chapter, which has detailed accounts of disparity, utilization, availability, breaks down the relevant market. Everything that we've discussed would be culminated into that chapter as well and delivered to the state as a part of the disparity study report. Alrighty, so then we have our passive participation, or again, like we refer to it, a marketplace analysis. So this is where we determine whether race, ethnicity, or gender status has affected the utilization of firms which are owned by members of these groups in both the public and private sector. As a part of this analysis, it includes self-employment disparities analysis and analysis of construction market disparities, as well as credit markets. So really Griffin and Strong's importance of looking into the marketplace is to kind of shift our eyes from simply looking at the state of Rhode Island, the government, which we will have looked at in all of the other portions of our disparity study analysis, and look out into the marketplace and see what's happening there outside of what's happening specifically with the state of Rhode Island government. This is important because the marketplace is ultimately the feeder of available firms that are ready, willing, and able to do business with the state of Rhode Island in the first place. So an example of this that we like to use to kind of understand the importance of this marketplace analysis is the utilization, availability, and disparity that we talked about a couple of slides earlier. We could easily look at the quantitative analysis chapter and see that, for example, there's 0% of utilized Asian American firms. So there's 0% utilized in the payment data for the state. This is just an example. There's no Asian American firms utilized. But then you look at the availability of Asian American owned firms, and there's 0% there as well. So in that instance, if you were purely looking at quantitative analysis, you would think that that result is at parity or that it's equal to each other. You have 0 available, 0 utilized, so there's not a disparity identified. But if you didn't look at the marketplace, you might not know if in the marketplace there are possible discriminatory practices that could be creating barriers or constraints on the business formation or business sustainability of firms that would even be available to do business with the state of Rhode Island in the first place. So that's why Griffin and Strong makes an attempt to really look into the marketplace and make sure we have a grasp on what's happening there as well as what's happening directly with the state of Rhode Island. And that culminates into another element, another chapter of the disparity study report as well. It'll be the past participation or marketplace analysis chapter. So all of the findings from that will be detailed in a chapter of the disparity study as well. Then we have our community engagement and anecdotal evidence portion of the disparity study. As I mentioned, there are a lot of different opportunities to get involved with the disparity study process, many pieces of the pie, kind of as you can see here. Beginning with our informational meeting, which of course you are in attendance of today. This is our opportunity to introduce the study to the community and answer any questions that you might have. Like I said, it's important for us to get involved with the community at this process because there will be a lot more opportunities for Griffin and Strong to work with you, to outreach to you, and make sure that we speak with you and hear your voices throughout this disparity study process over the next year. We also have our anecdotal interviews, which are our randomized one-on-one interviews with business owners. Those have actually already gotten started, so some of you may have received some outreach about those. Those are, again, randomly selected from a pool of vendors that we have identified. So those are just an opportunity to have, again, a one-on-one conversation with individual business owners and hear about your experiences as a business owner, whether you have done business with the state, what that experiences was like, or if you've attempted to, or even if you haven't, why you haven't, and if you have any reasonings for that. We also have our public hearings, which of course are open to the public. This is an opportunity to obtain any testimonies or personal experiences that the community has. It's open to the public. We will conduct about two of those sessions and be able to have a group of business owners together in an opportunity to speak with one another and speak to me about, or Griffin and Strong about your experiences as a business owner with the state of Rhode Island or in the marketplace. We also have our focus group sessions, which are not public. They are a closed group of randomly selected individuals that we would outreach to. They're a smaller group discussion, and we'll have those after the interviews have already been conducted as well as the public hearings, so that Griffin and Strong can kind of identify common themes that have come up throughout the rest of the anecdotal evidence collection process and be able to identify those shared experiences and talk to a smaller group in more detail about those experiences and kind of get more information at that point before moving on with the rest of our anecdotal evidence process. We also have our survey of business owners. You'll see that a lot of these other elements of the study are purely qualitative evidence collection, but the survey of business owners is importantly a quantitative aspect of our anecdotal evidence collection, which quantifies the experiences of business owners who are working within the marketplace or for the state or even in the private sector as well. It is open to absolutely all business owners once we launch that. And it's really just an opportunity to collect, like I said, some quantified information about your business and your experience as a business owner as well. We'll also have business, civic, and trade organization meetings. This is an opportunity to gain insight from community leaders and membership as well. These are also conducted as one-on-one interviews with different organizations because nonprofits and organizations aren't necessarily included in the other aspects of our anecdotal evidence collection since those are mainly focused more so on individual business owners. We really want to make sure to tap into that community and have an opportunity to talk to those leaders and get involved with their membership in any way possible as well. We also offer any language accommodations for anecdotal evidence collection upon request. And then finally, we have our email and social media comments. These are written comments that we also include and accept for purposes of anecdotal evidence collection. So if there's ever a time that you aren't able to attend a meeting or you don't feel comfortable sharing your experiences in a public setting, you can always submit your email comments, and those will be collected as part of your testimony and anecdotal evidence as well for the purposes of the study. Again, this chapter or this part of our process will culminate in an anecdotal chapter, which will be a part of our disparity study as well. I'm just going to check the chat just to make sure there's nothing urgent and we can save it for the Q&A.
Oh no, we can save it for the Q&A.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you. Alrighty, so findings and recommendations. So at this point from our presentation, we kind of have 5 key factors of our disparity study process that we've covered. So we have the legal analysis chapter that David mentioned. We have our policy review chapter that David covered. We have our quantitative analysis chapter. We have our passive participation or our marketplace chapter, and then finally we have our anecdotal chapter. So those 5 key components that are of the disparity study are where we pull our findings that culminate from each of those chapters and summarize the key points of each of them. And of course, as we've already mentioned, those recommendations are based on those detailed reviews as well as our institutional knowledge and best practices that Griffin and Strong has. And those recommendations may be race and gender neutral or they may be race and gender conscious remedies depending on the results of the disparity study analysis as a whole. So again, how can you be involved? First, be vocal if you're ever at a meeting and you have the opportunity to speak. We are always open to hearing from you and hearing your experiences, so please feel free to participate. Once we launch our survey of business owners, you will receive communication about that via email blasts or via any type of email communication. It'll also be posted on the Disparity Study website. If you are contacted by random sample to participate in an anecdotal interview or focus group session, definitely feel free to accept that invitation and be able to join us in one of those sessions to be able to share your experiences there. And of course, we do have our public hearings, which will be open to the public. Those will be communicated publicly as well. So make sure to book that on your calendars when those do launch. And they'll be, of course, next year. So when those do launch and you get some information about that, be sure to add that to your calendars if you're available so that we can hear your experiences there. And then for keeping up with the study, we have www.rhodeislanddisparitystudy.com. As I mentioned, that is the designated disparity study website that has launched for the state of Rhode Island disparity study. You can find information there about Griffin and Strong, about the disparity study process. There's a lot of really good information there, and there's also an events page which covers any recordings from past events as well as registration opportunities for future events that we have coming up that are open to the public as well. So really good information there. And then we also have our Rhode Island Disparity Study at gspclaw.com email address. That is the designated disparity study email address for this study. So if you ever have any questions, like if you had a question coming out of today's meeting that you didn't get a chance to ask, you could email there. Or if you wanted to share your testimony in an email comment, you could send that there as well so that we get to include that for the disparity study process. Alrighty, so an overview of the study's projected timeline. First off, you're kind of in this labeled spot between 1 and 2. We're on the way to 2 in the winter of 2025 going into 2026. So The initiation phase is what we start with, our work plan and schedule. We're in the process of conducting our data assessment meetings with the state of Rhode Island. So as I mentioned, just being able to identify all of the data sources and how data is maintained so that we can get a hold of that data as we start our data collection and analysis process. We'll have our kickoff meeting and of course today's informational meeting and launching the website, which we already have launched as well. Getting into planning for the data collection process, as well as our policy review, completing the case law review chapters we spoke about, conducting the anecdotal interviews, and getting ready to launch the survey of business owners. In the spring of 2026 is when we expect to begin our anecdotal analysis and start our passive participation or marketplace analysis. That's the point in which we think we would have completed our data collection from the state of Rhode Island as well as completed our survey of business owners. That's the time frame that we are looking to host the public hearings as well as our focus group sessions and begin to prepare our databases and begin our data analysis as well. For the summer of 2026, that's when we're looking to basically complete everything that we started in the spring. So that's our passive participation and our anecdotal analysis, complete our data analysis as well, and start putting together those pieces of our findings and recommendations in preparation for the draft of the full disparity study report. And then finally, in the fall and winter of 2026, going into just January of 2027 is when we are going to be drafting the full report and finalizing that report by the end of January 2027. So the primary portion of this study is going to be completed over the next calendar year in 2026. Once we've drafted our full disparity study report, we'll turn it over to the state of Rhode Island to review and of course conduct any presentations at that point as well, any final presentations as we have completed that disparity study. I wanted to put this slide here with some information to connect with us. We have our Facebook, our LinkedIn, and our website listed here. And again, just in case you didn't get to take it down from the previous slide, I did just want to list the study website and designated study email address here as well. Again, if you need to take a picture or take a note down, again, the study website is rhodeislanddisparitystudy.com and the email is rhodeislanddisparitystudy@gspclaw.com. And that brings me to the end of today's presentation of the information that we have for you guys today. So this will open up the Q&A portion of the meeting. So I am going to stop just sharing my screen for the moment and look into the chat and get started with the question and answers. Let's see here. So I see a comment from Tina that says, what about accessibility factor? Would you mind expanding on what you mean regarding the accessibility factor, just because I'm not sure what I was talking about at the time that you made that comment? My apologies.
I'm sorry. It was when you were talking about ethnicity, and stuff as thing, but I represent a community of people of disability. So I was thinking of it from the accessibility lens.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying. For the purposes of our analysis, our study groups are identified as minority and women-owned businesses. So when we are breaking it down into the study groups for the purposes of like our data analysis and things like that, we will specifically be looking at minority and women and breaking minority down into the individual race or ethnicity categories. But of course, disabled business enterprises and things like that are encouraged to be a part of the disparity study process and can be covered in the other elements of the disparity study as well, whether it be interviews or anecdotal evidence collection or things like that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Alrighty, so we have a comment from Nicole. Is the minority status of a firm determined solely by the individual or individuals owning it? David, I'm going to let you take that one.
Well, it depends how it's defined by the state, and that's one of the things we'll look at when we start looking at the policies is to determine how minority is defined, how generally speaking certification is also based on firm ownership, and so we'll look more into certification and the study groups themselves, and that'll tell us a little bit more information about that.
Thank you. Let's see. I have a comment from Christina. Are there ways to offer testimonials via email? Yes, we have the designated disparity study email address, which again is Rhode Island Disparity Study at gspclaw.com. When I get a chance, I can put it in the chat as well so that it's easier if you didn't get a picture to kind of copy and paste that information. But again, we definitely encourage if you feel more comfortable to offer your testimonial via email or just don't have an opportunity to attend a public facing event, to definitely go ahead and reach out to us that way. Alrighty, we got a question from Ron Hopkins. How do you correlate the difference between businesses on the state's existing vendor list versus those not currently on the bidder list? David, do you want to take that one as well?
Yeah, I might need some clarification on that. There are a number of, excuse me, there are a number of sources that we're going to use to talk about available firms in the marketplace, and some of those would be, again, bidders lists, registration lists, or certification lists. Those are some of the ways that we try to define or better understand what firms are available in the marketplace. I'm not sure if that answers the question, though.
Yeah, and further, Ron, so we kind of, like he said, we kind of put together this like master list of a lot of different resources that are identified. So, for example, we would utilize the state's existing vendor list, and we would utilize the bidder list as well, but we utilize all of these different third-party lists and things like that. And we build it into a master list. And of course, there's going to be a lot of repetition as a part of that list that we build out. So we would control for duplicates and make sure firms are only appearing once. But we kind of create this master list that's built based off of all of these different resources that we can identify in order to make sure that we can get a full picture of the firms that are there. And please feel free to either unmute or add to the chat if we didn't quite answer your question accordingly, because we want to make sure we provide you with clarification on that. For those of you who are wanting the presentation, I'm thumbs upping your message and I will get that out to you. Valerie, thank you for your comment. I definitely will reach out. So thank you so much for that communication. Craig commented, do you have a null/alternative hypothesis that is driving this study? And if so, what is it? David, I don't know
Yeah,
if you want to take that one.
no, there really is no hypothesis for the study. It's an objective review of the data, and it's an objective evaluation of the anecdotal data that we also collect. And in the event that there is underutilization that is found to be statistically significant, that would be our findings. If there turns out to be no underutilization, then those findings would dictate what findings and recommendations we would make at the end of the study. So we come in completely objective, not particularly looking for anything, but instead measuring using the data we receive from Rhode Island.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute to get some water. But Nicole asked which racial groups are designated as minorities in Rhode Island. I was trying to get our guide pulled up in front of me here, but I believe it is African American, Hispanic, Portuguese, Asian American, Alaskan Native. Keith, am I missing any? I know they're
Yeah,
designated
Hannah.
by the state.
Now, Hannah, let me answer that.
Okay.
Membership in any minority group in the state of Rhode Island is defined by Rhode Island General Law. That's Rhode Island General Law 3714-1. And in that, it identifies both racial and gender categories. African American or Black, Hispanic or persons of Latino ethnicity, Portuguese, persons of Portuguese, Brazilian, or other Portuguese culture, Asian American, Native American, and Alaskan Native. And then it also identifies gender, women, as a separate category.
Thank you so much, Keith. Alrighty, Craig asked, what is your target sample size and what will you do if you are not able to meet it? So for the sample size, I'm not sure exactly which portion of the disparity study you're thinking of, but for example, for anecdotal evidence collection, we kind of have an idea of, I guess, the numbers that we would like to see come out of those events that we host based off of just the years and years that we have of conducting these disparity study, decades of conducting these disparity studies and seeing what the best turnout kind of looks like. But a lot of that is kind of specific to the study as well. Aside from the survey of business owners, which we do kind of have a specific target number for, since we are going to use that for more detailed quantitative analysis. So if we're not able to meet that, we pretty much just keep pushing, and conduct more outreach and things like that to make sure that we do achieve that number. Alrighty. We have a question here from Sycon. Or we have a series of questions. How will you target the companies that available firms that are ready, willing, and able to do the work? Um, I don't know, David, if you would be able to answer that, but I think for me, I would want to see kind of what you mean specifically by target the companies. I'm not
Right.
quite sure what you're asking there, if you do want to either unmute or provide a comment.
Yeah, target meaning essentially reaching that population of business owners. Like what methods are you going to use to advertise or market the study and what you're doing so that you're able to get to those business owners.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for clarifying that. I appreciate that. So like I mentioned earlier, we basically put together a master outreach list, which we identify from a variety of different sources. We utilize vendor lists provided by the state, bidder lists, all of that information that we can get directly from the state, as well as publicly available lists and information, certification lists, things like that to see exactly what firms we have that we can see that are available and ready, willing, and able to do that work. And again, there might be a lot of duplication of that information, so we would narrow that down. But then ultimately, we would use that as our master outreach list, specifically within the state of Rhode Island, in order to promote anything that we have going on that's open to the public. We do that by email blasts. So some of you may have received information about this meeting according to some email blasts that came out about this informational meeting going on. We also do a lot of outreach to local business organizations, civic organizations, community organizations in order to be able to tap into their membership and ask that they promote the event either in newsletters or on their events page or their calendar page, so that their membership is aware of the meetings that are going on as well, just in case they were not receiving the emails from the email blast. And yeah, that's kind of our main way of getting getting an idea of community or companies that are in the community that we can be able to target. What is the goal ultimately in terms of how this data is to be used by the state? Will this require the state to comply with the statutory requirements? David, I'll kick that one to you.
Well, that might also be a little bit of a Keith question. Again, depending on the outcome, if there is a sufficient factual predicate for a remedial program, so a race or gender conscious program or program elements, that would be the recommendation that we would make. And it would be up to the state of Rhode Island to determine whether or not they want to accept that recommendation and ultimately implement it. But there are a number of different remedial programs or policies that might be recommended to get greater inclusion and to try and close the gap between availability and utilization.
And just to follow up again, Rhode Island state law requires that the state perform a third-party professional disparity study to assess the state of participation in state procurement within Rhode Island. As both David and Hannah said, the goal here is to get a third-party factual database review of the state's position. And with that, it'll be delivered to the governor of the General Assembly for deliberation if there's any requirements of adjusting or revising state statute or rules or regs that guide the current program.
Thank you, Keith and David. I'm going to try and go a little bit faster because I know we only have a few minutes left and we have quite a bit of questions, which I appreciate you guys' participation. Will you engage RIBA, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, or other local organizations that work with businesses or diverse populations? Yes, so I've started that outreach about a month ago to about 30 plus organizations, inclusive of those RIBA and Hispanic Chamber of Commerce that you mentioned, just to get involved with their membership and their representation as well to make sure we have the widest reach possible into the community. Doris asked, are you planning to interview only businesses that are already certified as MWBE? So no, again, we kind of create this master outreach list that is not only built from a certification list. So it's not only built from MBE certification or WBE certification. It has a lot of different lists that go into it, whether it be vendor lists or people who have bid with the state, people who've gotten contracts with the state, et cetera, who might not necessarily be certified. So we would use random samples for each of our race and ethnic and gender classifications and be able to conduct our interviews based on those categories. Please clarify. So Craig asked, please clarify how age and education are used for statistical significance, recognizing that many less educated individuals operate very successful businesses, and how does age factor into this? So good point. We're not necessarily using it for statistical significance per se. Our statistical significance is determined by our standard deviation analysis, but we utilize factors like age and education. Those are just examples. It's definitely not even close to an inclusive list that we utilize as our kind of control variables for our regression analysis. So that's what our economist does, who's not on the call today, who could provide a little bit more information about that. But our economist utilizes the data that we have and utilizes some control variables such as age and education and a lot of different other factors that are not driven by the race or gender of a firm owner in order to control for some of those factors and see if a disparity is still existing at that point after you've controlled that. Doris asked, are you planning to assess the procurement process between the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and the purchasing department? Yes, we are. And you're interested in having a one-on-one conversation, that's great. I'll definitely get in contact with you about that. Nicole asked, what's an example of a race or gender neutral remedy that you recommend when there is underutilization of minority-owned businesses? So David, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, there are a number, but yeah, I would just point to something very simple, such as forecasting. one of the things we sometimes recommend is that the procuring entity require their departments to do annual forecasts once their budgets are passed, do annual forecasts of the likely projects and contracts that are going to come up during that time, which helps everyone, including your smaller firms, be prepared for the bidding process, get their solicitations together. If there's going to be a teaming arrangement, they can get that in place. So just forecasting, and that forecast will go again to all potential bidders or vendors, irrespective of race, gender, or ethnicity. And so that's a race and gender neutral policy or procedure that can help get greater participation for your marketplace.
Great. Thank you, David. Tina, I see your comment about wanting to have a one-on-one conversation as well. I thumbs that up. That would be great. For those of you who wanted to participate in a one-on-one conversation, I will have to wait a little bit until the anecdotal interviews have been conducted just to make sure that you aren't contacted to participate there, because we don't want to kind of double dip into both of those anecdotal evidence collections. But I'll definitely reach out to you and be able to have those conversations. Thank you for your interest in participating. So we are at 7, so I'm just going to grab a couple more comments and questions here. For any in-person meetings, can you identify if they're accessible or not? So, Tina, we currently plan to host our meetings just like this virtually. We found that we get a lot more participation virtually. It's a lot easier for those for accessibility purposes, for people who are working around the clock as well. Just an opportunity for you to join virtually and be able to participate in the disparity study within your convenience. So we don't plan to have any in-person meetings at this time. So Craig said recognizing there are over 100,000 businesses. I'm curious what the sample would need to be to provide a study of statistical significance. If not here, then will it be put on your website for the study? So again, I am not the chief, like senior economist that we have on the team that we mentioned, Greg Price. So I do definitely appreciate, Greg, a lot of your more in-depth economic questions. And I'm sorry that I can't provide as much in-depth responses, but I will make sure to see if that information is on the website. And if not, feel free to submit any of those questions via email, and I'll make sure to get you some information about that in writing. Okie dokie. So we are a couple minutes over, so I'm just going to stop the questions at this point. If there's anything really pressing that you wanted to have included, you can put it in the comment. Maybe I can get back to you via email as well. But for now, if there's no further pressing questions that you guys have, I do just want to say that we appreciate very much your participation and taking the time out of your evening to join us for this informational meeting for the state of Rhode Island. We really appreciate it, and oh, I'm sorry. We do have a pressing question. One more question. My last one is about the illegal aliens.
Let me
Yes or
answer
no?
that, Hannah.
Okay.
Under state rules and regulations, applicants to be certified, to be approved to be certified, must be U.S. citizens or permanent resident aliens.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Nicole, for your question. But again, thank you so much for joining us. I will go ahead and conclude the question and answer portion of this disparity study informational meeting at this time, and conclude the meeting in its totality. But again, we do have some time to stay back for the public comments portion
Ven, por favor. Ven.
of the disparity study process. So I can pull up a slide about the public comments portion if you would like to stay back. I will dismiss Keith and anyone else from the state of Rhode Island, as well as David or Hema as well, and just be able to stay back with any individual business owners who would like to provide any public comments at this time. So again, thank you all so much for joining, and I'll go ahead and share that slide about how this public comment portion will go. But I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah.
Let me get this pulled up here. Keith, aside from you, is there anyone else on here from the state of Rhode Island team?
I cannot see at this point, and I'm logging off right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keith. Have a great rest of your evening. Alrighty. So can everyone, Tina, Eagle Eye, Denise, and Nicole, for those of you who have stayed back, can you see the slide that I have up right now? I just want to make sure. Okay, great. Great. Thank you guys so much. Alrighty, so for the public comments portion, the purpose of this is just to have an opportunity for you to share candid testimony about your experiences, whether they be positive experiences that you have or areas of concern that you have regarding doing business or attempting to do business with the state of Rhode Island, or even if you have not done business with the state of Rhode Island, you can just share why you have not done so if there are any specific reasonings for that. I did just want to have a disclaimer that everything said during this meeting would be available for public record, but Griffin and Strong's final report would not publish any of the names, business names, or affiliation of individuals who give testimony within our report. We use anonymous coding in our anecdotal evidence collection analysis. And for public comments, when you are providing comments, please begin by stating your name and your business name clearly for the record before beginning your testimony. If you're participating with the chat, of course, I can see your name, so you can just begin with stating your business name before providing a written testimony. But feel free to unmute and share your experiences, and I will be happy to listen and take notes and appreciate your participation as part of our anecdotal evidence collection for the study. Would anyone be able to or like to unmute in order to participate? Denise or Nicole, would you be able to unmute in order to participate in the public comments? Okay. Denise, are you here and able to participate in the public comments portion? Denise, if you're not able to unmute, are you able to put a maybe chat to list whether you're able to participate or interested in participating? Alrighty. So I don't think we'll be having any public comments for today's meeting. Again, as I mentioned during the presentation, if you would like to provide any comments via email rather than in a meeting setting, you can do that by sending it to Rhode Island Disparity Study at gspclaw.com. Again, thank you so much for participating in today's meeting, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.